AMD has fumbled the Zen 5 launch. Will Intel pick up the ball and run for the touchdown? Let's find out. So yeah, getting into the stock, AMD stock has plummeted from the 52-week high of over $200 per share, currently trading at $139.37. Intel, on the other hand, trades at $20.04, also has plummeted. Intel is at like a 10-year low. A 10-year low for Intel stock. So let's dig into both of these companies and figure out where AMD went wrong with Zen 5 and what's going to happen from here. What's going to happen from here for the stocks and for the companies themselves. By the way, Shamao says to like and subscribe. So yeah, what's been happening recently is both AMD and Intel for their desktop chips have been focusing on power. And I like to reuse this meme, but yeah, unlimited power. Okay, I can't do Palpatine's voice, but you get the idea. What's been happening is with both the Zen 4 and also the Intel chips as of late for the last 3 or 4 years, both AMD and Intel have had difficulties in increasing performance without jumping up the TDP voltage on their CPUs. And they're testing the limits on how much power they can pump into their CPUs in order to increase performance yearly, what they've been doing in the past. See, the thing is, AMD has had this basically like a ritual of about 15% gains year over year over year. But when Zen 4 launched, they were unable to achieve that 15% gain without jumping up the TDP voltage and increasing the power of those chips. And they got a lot of flack for that, a lot of flack. And Intel's been doing it for years. And here's just a chart, like the Intel Core i9-14900K clocks in at 290 watts of power. Oh my goodness. And it's been frying the chips. Their voltage issues have been frying the chips. And same for AMD. AMD's 3D chips have been frying the motherboards due to improper voltages. And look at that. AMD's Ryzen 9 7950X has been clocking at 221 watts. This was the last generation. Not this generation, the last generation. And they've been getting a lot of flack. Both AMD and Intel get a lot of flack for this. Because honestly, who wants a heater sitting at their feet? People already have a heater. Do they want a second heater? And also the power bills. The power bills for these things are huge. People are getting like $30, $40 per year on electricity bills just for these CPUs consuming so much power. So what AMD did is they sort of addressed this in their latest generation chips in Zen 5 by, actually let's first discuss Intel. Intel claims they fixed their frying issue by releasing a microcode update. So what they did is their 13th and 14th gen chips were failing after a certain period of time. They're basically like little ticking time bombs. They would fail after a period of time due to improper voltage spikes to the CPU. So what Intel did is they released this microcode patch update recently that limits the amount of voltage to the CPU. It caps it at 1.55 volts because it was getting into the 1.6, 1.65 volt range on spikes, and that was frying the CPUs. So yeah, let's get into AMD's Zen 5, which just released. So we got this report. No one is buying AMD's new Zen 5 CPUs, and it's painfully obvious why. That is an article headline. That is an article headline. And I may steal it. I might steal that one. We'll see. So anyway, yes. So AMD's focus on Zen 5 is efficiency. So you can actually see here, this is the architecture for the Zen 5, and you can read it if you want. The biggest differences for the Zen 5 are improved single-threaded performance, multi-threaded is about equal to last generation, and then also due to just efficiencies in the architecture, significant lower power draw. So AMD opted for lower power draw as opposed to increasing power draw to give you higher performance. So they chose power draw over performance, is what AMD did. But even then, you're going to see significant single-threaded performance improvements on the Zen 5, as well as a full 512-bit AX512 data path. So if you have an application that uses AX or AVX512, you're going to see a night and day difference with AMD's Zen 5. So those are the major differences there. So yeah, again, that's sort of nerd talk. But yeah, comparing just generation over generation for AMD to AMD, generation over generation. You got the AMD Ryzen 7 7700X and the AMD Ryzen 7 9700X. And as you can see, the boost clock is almost identical. The new generation is 5.5 gigahertz. The previous generation is 5.4 gigahertz. So it's nearly identical, just a little bit above. But again, AMD claims that their IPCs, their instructions per clock, they're claiming is 15% higher. So that's AMD's claim. And they're achieving this with a lower TDP. So it's a lower power draw from 105 watts to 65 watts. So people have noted this, that the CPUs, the prior generation CPUs, were running at 95 degrees Celsius. That's nearly melting the CPU. CPUs melt at around 100 degrees. So they clock them at 95 degrees. That's what they were doing. That's what was consuming so much power. Whereas AMD's newer gen CPUs, these Zen 5s, 9700Xs, consume about, or they cap out at about 75 degrees Celsius. So you're going to have much less power draw on these new CPUs. Now again, the performance is going to be almost identical to the prior generation for many tasks, and that's why reviewers are sort of panicking over AMD, saying, what is going on? Oh, and one more thing is AMD is releasing 4 chips on Zen 5 within 2 weeks of each other, but they staggered it. So now we get 2 chips now, the 9700 and the 9600, but the 2 flagships, the 2 fast chips, we'll be releasing later, about a week from now. The 9950X and then the one just below that. So the faster chips are releasing later, and we'll receive reviews on those when those come out. So we don't know how those will perform just yet. But we do know the slower chips, the bargain bin chips, which is what we're reviewing now. These are the bargain bin chips. So they even reduce the voltages on these bargain bin chips quite significantly. It's quite significantly less power for about the same performance. And that's the thing, is people want more performance, not the same performance. Now there are a couple of instances where the newer generation is faster. For example, you have compiler generation times like GCC, which is a C++ compiler. And you can see the orange bar is the 9700X, the newer one. The 7700 is the red bar, or the black rather. So you can see it's a little bit better on GCC. It's a lot better on Exchange too. So I'm going to go over these briefly. Again, this is Nerd Talk. This is a finance channel. I want to focus on the numbers, the finance numbers, not the performance numbers. But we got to dig into these a little bit, because in order to properly invest in a company, you need to understand the company. In order to understand the company, you need to understand these numbers. You need to know sort of what's going on. So one of the most popular benchmarks is Cinebench. Now, it's a major benchmark. So and this is from AnandTech actually. All of these performance benchmarks are from AnandTech. So go to them for this article. They are great. So go to AnandTech. And I sort of stole this from them. So apologies. I did not run these specs. I did not do these comparisons. I did nothing. I went to their article. I did copy paste. Control C, Control V. That's my job. So anyway, what's going on here is what AnandTech did is they took sort of similar parts and they compared them against each other. Now, how did they compare similar parts? They did it basically by price range. So they took AMD's price range about $250 to $350 and Intel's price range of around that same quadrant, and they compare those against each other. So you've got comparisons between the 9700X. Now they sort of cheated here by including the Core i9-14900K, which is Intel's highest spec chip. So they sort of cheat here by including that one. So that one they sort of snuck in. But what do you want to compare is the 9700X, the 9600X, and the 14600X, and if they supply it, the 14700 case rather. That's the Intel chips. So you'll see here in the single thread Senate benchmarks between the 9700 and the 7700. It's actually pretty good gains. So like I mentioned before, the single thread between the black and the orange is actually pretty significant, about 30%. So that's the efficiency gains of Zen 5. So that's where it's good. Now, where it gets sort of not as good is multi-threading. In multi-threading, you'll see here that AMD's Ryzen, the 9700, which is the newer one, it clocked in at 1111. The prior generation, which is 2 years old now, clocks in at 1053. That's almost identical. That's just a little bit more. It's like a 1% gain on the efficiencies, or rather, sorry, on the power of multi-threading. Now again, it's nearly identical power on multi-threading, performance rather, nearly identical performance on multi-threading, but you do get it for 30% less power usage. So it really depends on, what do you want? Do you want unlimited power for unlimited performance, or you want something a little bit more, considerate to your energy bill? So that's really what you want there. And honestly, AMD sort of served Intel a layup, a softball, and it's up to Intel if they want to knock that out of the park or not. If Intel wants to increase the power voltage and increase the just go all out on that, Intel can surpass AMD in these specs. Now, another reason why AMD is sort of drawing back the power on these chips and sort of like playing it easy is because in games, these chips, as well as AMD's two flagship models, the 9950X, for example, and even Intel, everybody pales in comparison to AMD's 3D chips. AMD's 3D chips are the leaders in gaming and have been for like 3 or 4 years now. 3 or 4 years, AMD's 3D chips have led in gaming substantially. AMD cannot compete with their own 3D chips. Intel cannot compete with AMD's 3D chips. That extra cache is huge in games, and it is giving AMD a permanent advantage in gaming. So AMD has already locked up the gamer enthusiast market. The gamer enthusiast market is already locked up. So I think AMD is trying to sort of go for the more budget conscious consumer with these other chips, these non-3D chips. I think AMD is going for the budget consumer because the gaming market is locked up. So if you go to the Cinebench single thread, again, we're comparing, I think I repeated that one. Okay, let's move on. So if you get into actual games themselves, as I mentioned before, the results are actually, honestly, in this case, in Cyberpunk, it's actually a little slower. You lose like half a frame going from the previous AMD generation to the current AMD generation on these lower end parts. You lose about half a frame. So you lose about 30% power less. You get about 30% less power, and you lose about half a frame in Cyberpunk. Again, Cyberpunk's a little bit interesting because they sort of favor they favor Intel CPUs. So yeah, let's get into what AMD's focused on and what really each company is focused on, because actually they're diverging in two different directions. AMD is going one direction, Intel is going a different direction. And I don't think either of them are really focusing on client at this moment as their primary concern. Their primary concern is completely different. What AMD is focusing on is artificial intelligence, and secondary is just data center, like the Zen series chips, the EPYC chips in data center. That's what AMD is focused on. You can see here, AMD's data center revenue this last quarter jumped 115% in revenue. Operating income jumped 405% to $743 million in data center. Now, AMD's got a tough competitor in data center, though, in artificial intelligence, and their name is NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is going to get about 80 to 90% of the artificial intelligence market, the H100, the H200s, the B200s, and so forth. AMD's MI300 and future products just aren't going to be able to compete. AMD is going to max out, I think, around 10 to 20% of the AI market. But the AI market, even at 20%, is going to produce a substantial amount of income for AMD, even at just 20%. But yeah, as you can see here, AMD's client revenue or client is actually rebounding. That's primarily because the client segment in PCs crashed last year. Crashed. So you see a rebound there. Gaming is going through a down cycle and so on and so forth. So yeah, again, AMD's focus is on artificial intelligence, and they're betting all the money on AI. And this is a picture of the AMD's Instinct MI300 accelerator for servers. So, and then what is Intel doing? Intel is focusing actually on being a contract manufacturer, a contract chip manufacturer. So, like I mentioned, AMD is focusing on competing with NVIDIA. Intel is focusing on competing not with AMD, but with TSMC. TSMC is the number one chip contract company. Now, that's what Intel's plan is here. Now, this is costing Intel tens of billions of dollars per year. Just an enormous amount of money. Like $7 billion a quarter is going into these plants. Now, these plants are going to go online soon. Intel is going to start shipping product to consumers soon. And they're buying the top-of-the-line units, the top-of-the-line lithography units from ASML. Whereas TSMC is doing like the current generation. AMD's doing Intel's doing the next generation of these lithography machines. Now, these are more future-proof. However, they are also double the price as the previous generation machines. So double the price, but they're not going to have to replace these in a couple of years, as TSMC will probably have to do as things get smaller, as the the transistor density gets high enough. TSMC is going to eventually have to get to these machines as well. Hopefully for them at a discount. But yeah, this is going to cost Intel upwards of maybe $100 billion to build out all of these plants. And it is a huge expense. And it's the reason why Intel is currently GAAP unprofitable. And they're burning a lot of money on these plants. So yeah, it's a lot of work to do. And both companies have a lot of work in front of them, and that's why the stock is down, is both of them have a lot of work to achieve significance in what they're going for. AMD's got a lot of work for artificial intelligence, and Intel's got a lot of work to do for contract chip manufacturing. That said, where is the best place for you to spend $5 today? On my Patreon, I have a significant package for you for only $5. I got portfolio management. I got decent valuations. I got my own Patreon portfolio where you can track all the moves I make as I grow the portfolio from $0 to $1 million. So it can give you sort of a sense of how I think and how I build a portfolio for long-term success. It also includes DCF valuations and corporate analyses. Now, I have done DCF valuations on over 15 different companies. That includes AMD, it includes NVIDIA, it includes Tesla, and many other companies. So, yeah, just $5 a month. You'll never find a better deal. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.